In early March 2026, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, not as a warning, as retaliation, after US and Israeli strikes killed its supreme leader and destroyed its military command. Within days, oil surged past $100 a barrel. A multitude of governments declared national energy emergencies. Fuel rationing was introduced. Supply chains buckled, and the Strait of Hormuz wasn't even destroyed. Iran just threatened to attack ships moving through it. This showed that geographic control of a choke point doesn't require firepower. All it requires is a strategic position, and that's not even the most critical choke point. China operates the largest navy on Earth. More warships than any rival, more tonnage than most coalitions combined. On paper, it's an unmatched maritime power. But naval dominance means nothing if you can be easily starved. China's most critical supply line passes through a single stretch of water less than 3 miles wide. India controls the territory that overlooks the entrance. This is the Malacca Trap, and it makes Hormuz look like a warning shot. The Strait of Malacca stretches approximately 500 miles between the coastlines of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. At its narrowest point, the Phillips Channel south of Singapore, the navigable lane, measures just 1.7 miles. Malacca carries 40% of global trade, 1/3 of global GDP, and 80% of China's oil imports. Every hour, 10 ships carry the fuel that keeps Chinese factories running. Very large crude carriers are forced through in single file. There is no wider lane. The consequences of losing it make the Hormuz situation look like a warning shot. In November 2003, Chinese President Hu Jintao acknowledged this reality and referred to it as the Malacca Dilemma. He acknowledged that India could close the waterway and sever China's energy supply entirely. A blockade here doesn't need to target China specifically, it only needs to close the gate. India's Andaman and Nicobar archipelago extends in a long southward arc through the Bay of Bengal. The southernmost part of that arc is Great Nicobar Island. It sits approximately 40 nautical miles from the western entrance to the Strait of Malacca, directly astride the 6-degree channel. This is the primary deepwater approach that every laden tanker must transit before reaching the strait itself. A few years back, aircraft carriers were the ultimate advantage in wars. They were even referred to as moving islands. But now, it's the islands that are being called unsinkable aircraft carriers. And the Great Nicobar Island is the unsinkable aircraft carrier permanently positioned at the entrance to China's most critical supply route. India doesn't need to sail anything there. It's already there. In February, India's National Green Tribunal cleared the Great Nicobar Island project, a $9.7 billion development covering 166 square kilometers. The project includes an international container transshipment terminal at Galathea Bay, a dual-use military and civilian airport capable of handling strategic airlift, a 400-megawatt power plant, and an integrated township. India already operates the Andaman and Nicobar Command from these islands, the country's first in-service integrated military command, alongside INS Baz Naval Air Station at Campbell Bay, which provides continuous surveillance over eastern Indian Ocean approaches and Malacca-bound traffic. The Great Nicobar project doesn't create a new strategic reality. It implements a strategic reality that geography established long before any nation developed a navy. China classifies its oil inventory data as a state secret. The exact figures are unknown by design. However, available estimates as of early 2026 place total crude reserves at roughly 90 to 100 days of net imports. At current consumption rates, with 80% arriving by sea through Malacca, the clock is mathematical. In 1941, Japan confronted the same structural problem. Most of its oil was imported, with supply lines controlled by the United States following an American embargo. Japan chose preemptive military escalation. The outcome was 4 years of total war, ending in nuclear devastation. China now faces a similar structural dependency. The geography is worse, the stakes are higher, and the clock doesn't pause. China alone consumes 25% of global energy output. Its manufacturing base accounts for 30% of global industrial production. 15% of all oil consumed on Earth flows into Chinese industry. This is not an economy that can absorb supply disruption gradually. The failure sequence progresses gradually but occurs rapidly. In the first weeks of a Malacca blockade, domestic crude prices spike as import volumes fall. Petrochemical producers, the feedstock backbone of Chinese manufacturing, begin cutting operating rates as input supply tightens. The closing of the Strait of Hormuz in March made Asian petrochemical producers curtail their operating rates within days of a partial supply disruption, and that's just from one strait carrying 20% of global oil. Now imagine what would happen if Malacca, which carries 80% of China's oil, were blockaded. The Cascade at Malacca doesn't have a comparable ceiling. Within weeks, manufacturing sectors reliant on petroleum-derived inputs, including electronics, automotive, pharmaceuticals, and synthetic textiles, begin experiencing compression across their supply chains. There are no peripheral industries. This is the core of China's export economy and the foundation of its Made in China 2025 strategic program. Within months, tank farm levels reach critical depletion thresholds. Refinery throughput falls, industrial output contracts. A blockade of the Malacca Strait doesn't need to fire a single weapon at Chinese territory. It only needs to hold. The Cascade does the rest. China has not ignored the Malacca dilemma. Since 2013, it has invested over $20 billion in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This 2,000-mile infrastructure network connects Xinjiang province to Guangdong port on the Arabian Sea and is specifically designed to provide overland energy access that bypasses the strait entirely. However, the greatest challenge is capacity and vulnerability. The corridor can't accommodate the same volume of traffic that the Malacca Strait handles. It runs through some of the most politically unstable terrain on Earth. Balakistan Liberation Army operatives have conducted sustained attacks on Chinese engineers and infrastructure throughout the project's lifespan. In any conflict scenario involving India, the corridor passes directly through territory exposed to Indian military interdiction. It's not a viable substitute. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor presents the same structural failure at a smaller scale. The Myanmar Yunnan oil pipeline, operational since 2017, carries a maximum of 420,000 barrels of crude per day at full capacity. China's daily Malacca intake is approximately 6.5 million barrels. The pipeline covers just 6.5% of that volume, and Myanmar's ongoing civil war has severely disrupted even that limited throughput. There are other alternative proposals, like a Kra Canal through southern Thailand, Arctic sea routes via the Northern Sea Route, and expanded power of Siberia gas pipelines from Russia. But each of these alternatives remains either decades away from operational viability or physically incapable of carrying the required volume and scale. The proof is already visible since March 2026, with Hormuz disrupted and global energy markets under sustained pressure. China's overland alternatives have not compensated for the supply gap created by a painful closure of one strait. When facing full pressure in the Malacca Strait, the situation becomes significantly worse. China can't build its way out of the Malacca trap. The infrastructure gap between what exists and what is needed is not a planning problem. It's a geographical problem. And geography doesn't negotiate. The price of your fuel, your electronics, your pharmaceuticals, all of it depends on these straits staying open. Hormuz showed what closure looks like. Malacca is the version where China gets starved, and no one has a plan for that. The Great Nicobar Island is set at the entrance to the Strait of Malacca long before any nation built a fleet. India is now developing it. A superpower is only as strong as its most critical supply line. And geography doesn't negotiate. If you want to stay ahead of the curve on global flashpoints and modern naval warfare, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because what's coming is even bigger than this. We'll keep you updated on the front lines. Thanks for watching.